lived in Hong Kong for over 2 decades, so you must have seen this transformation happen. Can you tell us about, your experiences with that? Anything that stands out in your mind as being like you seeing what was coming?
Well, yeah, I mean, I moved there in 1992 after 5 years in South Korea, and South Korea had just gone through this remarkable transformation from it wasn't technically a military dictatorship when I moved there in first half of 1987, but pretty close to, well, what it is today, thriving democracy. And by the way, if you told me that the New York Times is going to move its Asian editorial headquarters from Hong Kong to Seoul, if you told anybody that in the late 1980s, they would have thought you were nuts. But in fact, that's what's happened. So at that point, Hong Kong, I go down to Hong Kong. It was the land of freedom. I mean, dozens of Chinese language newspapers, a robust English language media, a couple or three, maybe at that point, English language newspapers. It's kind of like anything goes. Now, there wasn't democracy. There was freedom, but there wasn't democracy. And I came a month before a remarkable man named Chris Patten, Lord Patten, became the last governor. He said, forget it, I'm not wearing the plumes and all the finery of British colonials. We're going to throw that off symbolically, but also we're going to throw it off. We're going to have elections. They'd had the first kind of baby territory-wide elections a few months before Patten came. And he introduced, something close to universal suffrage, halfway there, in terms of electing the city council. I mean, think about it. You're electing the city council, which didn't even have the power to initiate spending bills or anything. It was a very top-down administrative government. So Patton set the bar pretty high. But Hong Kong people were already well-educated. They were increasingly traveling. They knew about the world. They were ready. They were as ready for freedom as anybody. And hundreds of thousands of them had gone out after the Tiananmen killings. Then the Chinese came. And first of all, they were very angry that Patton had kind of wrecked their so-called through train. They had hoped that the British colonialists would keep a kind of repressed political system. And Patton blew all that out of the water. We can get back to that and why he did that. But I think he was a remarkable man, and he made up for a lot of the deficiencies during the 156 years of British colonial rule. But whatever deficiencies Hong Kong had during that time, it did have rule of law. And that's something Jimmy Lai talks about all the time. It's the first thing he talks about. He's a great human rights campaigner. He's unbelievable, I guess you could say, dissident. But it's interesting because he talks about it always in terms of Western values. He talks about rule of law, freedom of speech. So these are the values that Jimmy inculcated in the time since he'd arrived in 1961 until the British left. And so, at first it was okay. I think we were all trying to give the Chinese the benefit of the doubt. They were trying to keep their hands off things. But of course, they needed to control. They don't know what to do other than to control. And they, in 2003, tried to come in with a national security law. Not surprisingly, 500,000 people went out in the streets and said, no way. Now, that was when Jimmy and his newspaper, Apple Daily, started becoming more overtly political. They'd always fought against corruption. They had always worked for democracy. But in 2003, they actively worked to get people out in the streets. And I think that's when he really became a target. So, after 2003, you saw, the tensions building because it was clear that China was not going to keep its promises to move towards more democracy, which, by the way, just really meant electing the mayor and having full universal suffrage for the city council. So we just saw things, getting increasingly tense. You guys mentioned the 2014 umbrella movement when for 79 days, students camped out in front of the government headquarters. Jimmy was there every one of those 79 days. He was tear gassed. He was arrested. But then in 2019, I think what happened is the scene in Beijing, seeing 2 million people come out in the streets. And then at the end of all this, getting wiped out in the election by Democrats. Again, these were very low-level elections. They were for the so-called district council officers, like a ward. These politicians had no power other than to, clean up the litter in their neighborhood or something. I don't want it to mean that. I'm just saying this was not a threat to Chinese rule. But you had an overwhelming victory by the Democrats. And I think Beijing just said, we can't handle it. we lost Hong Kong. And rather than talking to the people of Hong Kong, having some negotiations, they never had one negotiation. So rather than trying to meet the legitimate demands of the Hong Kong people, again, I think it's kind of in the communist DNA. When you're in trouble, crack down. And so it was really that period from 2019, 2020 and beyond when things went from being difficult to being absolutely impossible. And again, this rapid crushing in less than 5 years, one of the freest cities in the world to one of the least free.
I think COVID was really a blessing for the CCP in terms of like their ability to crack down on Hong Kong. Like the last time we were in Hong Kong was October of 2019. We had been there in the summer earlier to cover the protests when they started, and then we were there back again to cover the International Day. But we left on the day that there was an anti-mask protest because the Hong Kong government was trying to keep people from wearing masks during the protests. And so it's kind of funny that like the anti-mask protest, and then only a few months later it's like mandatory masks, no gathering more than 2 or 3 people in public, all the stuff that was really helped the CCP crack down on Hong Kong in a way that they may not have been able to do so smoothly if they hadn't had that ability to stop people from gathering or to, the quarantine camps, all that stuff.
Oh, and also, the world was pretty focused on Hong Kong when it was happening, and then COVID. Everyone was focused on COVID.
Yeah, it's interesting whether or not you believe that COVID came out of a Chinese lab or it came out, just from the wild. As you were saying, it's almost like they couldn't have invented something that would have helped them more. I mean, for all the reasons that you both have just mentioned, took the world's eyes off Hong Kong. It allowed, so they say, oh, sorry, you can't have any more protests, COVID, yeah, it's funny. With the thing of going from, you can't wear a mask or we're going to throw you in jail to you must wear a mask or we're going to throw you in jail. That's typical of the kind of, complete policy flip-flops we see under a communist system.
So in addition to Jimmy Lai, whose trial is started, there's also this month 45 other pro-democracy. Protesters are not even protesters. Some of them are just more activists or people who believe in democracy. Have been sentenced to pretty. I mean,
some of them were legislative officials, like they were in the government.
Right.
Yeah.
So like that's a lot of people who just got some pretty harsh sentences. Benny Tai got 10 years. Other people got 4 or more years.
But he was up for life, so it was so nice that they only gave him 10 years.
Yeah. I think as Shirley was saying, most of them were elected officials. Many of them were district councilors who had won in that previous November's election. They actually were guilty of, subversion of state power. What did that mean, really? It meant that they ran an unofficial election primary to try to get the strongest candidates to run for legislative office. So you think about this. You've got lawyers, professors like Benny Tai, journalists, activists, social workers. I mean, just engaged citizens. They're the kind of people in our country, we'd celebrate them for being involved. And you want to lock them up. You just destroy their lives, destroy their family lives. So that there were 75 people, I think, initially picked up, of whom 47 were charged, 45 convicted. Yet cumulatively, they got 250 years. And we're supposed to feel grateful if the sentences weren't longer. I mean, the guy who brought me out to Asia for the first time, editor Philip Bowering from the Far Eastern Economic Review, his wife, Claudia Mo, former journalist, 67, almost 68 years old. She's been held in jail for almost 4 years. For what? She gave up her British citizenship because she was patriotic enough that she wanted to run for the Legislative Council in Hong Kong. She did successfully and won many times. These are the kind of people that you're trying to destroy. So then you're going to come back and have a international global financial leaders summit, as Hong Kong did in the middle of November, and tell the heads of Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley that everything's good and getting better in Hong Kong. Just had a little trouble a few years ago. Don't worry, nothing to do with you. You can still make money. Well, I'm sorry. Global financial centers don't have political prisoners. Full stop.
Do you think that's a message Goldman Sachs and others are taking?
Well, we're trying to make sure, and we're going to increasingly try to make sure that they hear that, and that they hear that from people in the U.S. I mean, it's unconscionable that look, they can have their business there. In fact, business is not good, although they go and say nice things in Hong Kong. many financial firms are actually quietly pulling out. Nobody announces when they leave. But I think it's outrageous that David Solomon and people from Apollo, from Morgan Stanley, really leading financial firms are going to go and basically give aid and comfort to a repressive regime. Again, you show me any other global financial center where they're throwing political prisoners in jail. I mean, Hong Kong went from zero to, over the past 5 years, 1,900, more than 1,900 people have been jailed on political charges. And I mean, it goes on. There's still 7,000 people who haven't been tried yet. I mean, you telling me this is a normal financial center that's on a par with London and New York as it used to be? You can't have both. You want a financial center, you need free flow of information. You might not care about democracy. You've got to have free information. If you can't run a newspaper, I mean, they're putting people in jail now because they've got a T-shirt with some slogan that the government doesn't like. Yes, I don't know if Goldman's hearing it yet. We, Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, ran a full-page ad in the New York Times decrying this despicable behavior, and we'll try to hold them to account. I mean, I can't really influence what Xi Jinping does or what the Hong Kong government does, but I and my colleagues can do what we can to hold Western firms accountable for buttressing this evil regime. And it is evil. I mean, you don't strip nonviolent people of their money and especially of their freedom for no reason, and then just kind of get away with it and get help from Wall Street in particular.